Welcome to CWS Christian Writing and Speaking. I'm your host, Jackie Wilson. And today's guest is the author of 22 books. He is known worldwide for contemporary short stories, revealing emotions and issues often experienced but not always voiced. His posts, A Thought for Today, short stories and articles can be found at branchisole.com and on YouTube. He's a graduate of Texas State University, and he did postgraduate work at the University of Houston and holds an Oxford Master's Theology degree from Trinity Bible College and Seminary. Please welcome to the CWS show, Mr. Branch Isole. Welcome, Mr. Isole.
Good morning, Jackie. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about your journey because you actually started in education and then you venture into theology, and now you become this well-known author, and you are changing people's lives. So share with us, where did the transition happen? Why go from education into theology?
Yeah, everybody's life changes with the decisions and the choices they make, and mine was no different. I grew up in a military family, average household. Went to school. I went to college in Texas. After college, I became a middle school and high school teacher. And from that, I went into middle school administration. I was an assistant principal. And, I loved the kids and I hated the system. So I left education and I went to work actually in corporate America with a textbook publishing house. So I went from teaching to working with teachers to selling textbooks to teachers. And I did that for about 15 years. I was with a couple of different companies. I was a sales manager with one of those companies. And I soon discovered that the corporate world held some of the same anxieties and disappointments for me that, education held. The system is designed, to make the system work. In education, it's keeping things going, and in corporate world, it's keeping things going to make lots of money. So I discovered that world wasn't for me, and I was sort of disappointed in myself and what I had become. And I decided that I wanted to change my life, and I would pursue truth, whatever truth looked like for me and my relationships. And so I went on a 15-year journey of study and exploration in search of the truth. And I studied some Eastern philosophies, mysticism, Eastern religions, and all of that study brought me back to Christianity. I was raised as a Christian, but we were not practicing Christians. We were what I call C and E, which is, Christmas and Easter. And other than that, the Lord and spiritual, growth was not part of my upbringing. So it was foreign to me, but I did have some background in Christianity. And that journey led me back to Christianity to look at Christianity, in comparison to the other world religions and spiritual belief systems that I had come in contact with. So it gave me sort of an idea of the similarities and the differences. After that journey, I was embracing the ways of the world, and I was living outside of the law, and I got into some legal problems and troubles. And that experience really changed my life. And so from that point on, I decided I had to become a better person. I had to be more truthful with myself and with the people that I came into contact with. So I went back to school and got a master's in theology. And from that came my first book. And it was a study of different world religions and sort of a layman's comparison. People I would come in contact would say, well, I'm going to be a Buddhist, right? And I said, okay, so what does that look like to you? And most people didn't know. They just thought, well, I've heard about Buddhism and I've heard people talk about it, so I'm going to be a Buddhist. So the book actually looks at the world's different religions, as I said, and asks the same 10 questions of every religion. And the thought was, I had written it for fallen away Christians and people who were seeking and searching, for a spiritual path or spiritual grounding. So it finally came out as sort of this comparison so that a reader could read and see what the fundamentals of the 8 basic religions of the world are. And then they could decide based on what they've read and learned, because all of them would be answering the same questions. All of the religions would be answering the same basic 10 questions. And hopefully then the reader would have a little more information, and then they could make a more well-informed decision of, okay, I'm going to be a Muslim, I'm going to, practice Judaism, I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to be a Buddhist, so that was the intent behind the book, was sort of give people a basic understanding that I'm searching for a spiritual path. Which one do I want to pursue? And that was my first book. And now 25 years later, there's 22 books.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that you did is to say people have a choice. I find that a lot of people, when they're trying to tell people about Christianity, they're trying to force their beliefs on them. But I love that you said, look, this is what the world has to offer. And you have this opportunity to choose what is it that you want. And these questions that you go through, I love that because we do have a choice. It's not God doesn't force himself on us. He tells us, you come, I will seek you, and I want you to come. But it is your choice. Now, what I tell people, and I work with kids a lot, and I would tell them, look, you can choose whatever you want to choose. You just have to be prepared to deal with the consequences of that. I would love to talk about some of the questions that you ask in that book. How do you help them, well, bring them to a point where they're making a conclusion about where they want to be? So, can you tell us about a few of those questions?
Sure, it's just real basic. Is there a God? Number one, and what does that look like? And then let's take Judaism and Christianity for an example. God gave Moses 10 commandments, right? Mm-hmm. And those 10 commandments are his dictates to humanity about moral and ethical questions and answers. That is, there's no situation that we can get ourselves into in this world that's not covered by one of those 10 commandments, right? So that's our fundamental understanding of what our relationship with God looks like or should look like, and how we respond to the people in our lives. That is, how we get along with those people in our lives that we come into contact with. So from there, each religion then evolves based on the needs of its community or its believers. And one of the questions is, in your religion or in your belief system, what happens when you die, right? And one of the other questions is, how do you respond to people who question, your belief system? So that they're specific, but they're really general in order to give the reader sort of a foundation. So, the Buddhists talk about the path and suffering. That's primarily their focal point from Buddha is life is about suffering and how you handle that suffering and what the accomplishment of that suffering is supposed to do. It's just trying to give the reader some basic idea of this is what our system, believes and is founded on. And that's the whole idea, is to give the reader a choice, but to give them some fundamental information so that the things that they may have heard about a particular religion can find a place or fit into the puzzle so that then they can go further down that particular path. We have a lot of people, basically everyone in the world, whatever their belief system is in their family or their tribe or their community is what they grow up with. And so that's what they believe. And yet, we have people who have fallen away from every religion for a lot of different reasons. So you have to ask yourself, why do so many people abandon the belief system or the religion that they were raised in? And this is particularly a problem for Christianity, especially today. Well, most religions have veered away from what the tenets of the original founder was: Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna. All of the basic tenets of religions are similar. There's a God outside of ourselves, and he has a power and a relationship with us, and he instructs us to behave in a certain manner in our relationship with him and with others. And as long as the master was alive to teach and to share, the tenets of God, there was no problem. But the minute the master dies, his vacuum, his absence needs to be filled by others, right? So the ones who are closest to him try to gain that position of authority. And when you have more than one, and you always have more than one, you immediately start to have issues and problems. It then becomes less of teaching morals and ethics and more of how do I gain the power and the control that that person had in relationship to his followers. And that's where religions begin to change and morph. They go from the tenets of behavior, moral and ethical behavior, to who's going to determine what's right and what's wrong, what's righteous and what's not righteous, and the politics start to get involved. So religions have all started out with a pure heart, but they've all morphed over the centuries into more of a power struggle and just another entity in the world that uses its wealth and its power to control, the believers. God never says to us that we have to go through somebody else to get to him, to have a relationship. We don't have to go through a priest or a pastor or a pope or an imam or a rabbi. That's not required for us to have a living relationship with God. But it's there, and a lot of people, are fed spiritually through religion, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But so many of us grow up thinking, that's the only way, and whatever that religion believes is what I believe, without questioning. And like you say, we have options, more so today than ever before because we have more freedom. But, in the last 500 years, people's focus was on survival. They didn't have leisure time or time to sit around and talk about, is there a God and who he is and what does he do? So the growth of the world has allowed growth of religions. But, in virtually every religion, the men in power want to keep that control and power. And so that's why we have so many people, who are grow up in a religious situation or cognizant of religion, and yet they fall away. They're disappointed, they're frustrated, they're confused, They feel they're not being told the truth. So they fall away. Some people, embrace the world's ways and just go down that path. And other people who find themselves struggling often come back to religion, one of the religions, in order to fulfill those needs that they have in their mind and their heart. So we're all in this struggle of, what does spirituality look like to me, and how do I embrace it or accomplish that relationship? But it's a choice, and like I say, all choices have consequences, and that's the pivotal theme with all of my books. Is we make choices, and those choices have consequences, and do we learn from those consequences, or do we keep repeating the same choices that bring us stress and struggle and conflict?
Yeah, and I think it's important. Went through this yourself, asking these questions, and then ultimately you decided that Christianity was the way for you. After looking and seeing, and maybe even experimenting with what you saw other people practice, why Christianity for you?
Yeah, great question. Couple of reasons. Number one, no other religious master or leader, Buddha, Krishna, um, Muhammad, none of them ever claimed to be the Son of God. Okay, that's the first thing. The Bible, if we believe there's a God, then we also must believe that being God, his word is true. And if his word is true, then all the things that he says and directs or teaches others to share as truth must also be true. Um, in the Holy Scriptures, for every religion, the Bible is the only one that has the actual words of Christ, where he claims to be the Son of God, the Christ, the Messiah, where God himself claims that Jesus is who he is from eyewitness accounts, and where his followers, the people who actually lived and walked with him, also claim that he is who he is and saw, his works and teachings in action that verified his word was true. Now, we all have a choice, and you can believe the scriptures or not, that's your choice. But Christianity is the only religion that makes such claims that can be verified by archaeology, history, um, society's traditions, oral traditions, and writings. And if you don't believe at that point, then you simply choose not to believe. You said something very important in this. God never demands anything of us. And a lot of people miss this point, that in order for you to have a relationship with God, it has to be a voluntary choice on your part. He's not going to coerce you, cajole you, connive to get you to believe. That's not who he is. And for him to do that or exercise that kind of power, what would be the point? If he's demanding that you believe in him, then what good is that for him or for us? So belief is a voluntary acceptance and choice. And the only thing God demands of us in our life is, sometime before we take our last breath, we will have to decide, is he who he says he is? And is Jesus Christ who he says he is? And that's the only thing he demands of us. And other than that, belief and faith is strictly an individual voluntary choice. And some people choose to believe and some people choose not to believe. And both will, you know, see the truth someday and get the reward for their belief that, you know, that they deserve. We all will face that day.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and just sharing your observations. And thank you for putting it in books because I think people really need to know and understand so that they don't feel like they're being forced into something. Because when you're trying to force somebody into something, it gives them a different perspective that's not necessarily healthy. And so we want people to feel like they do have a choice because that is the truth. You do have a choice. And as I said earlier, you just have to decide whether or not you want to deal with the consequences if you do, in fact, choose whatever you decide to choose. Please tell people how they can stay connected with you.
Thanks for asking. It's easy to get, you know, everything that I write and I publish is available on my website and on my YouTube channel. And the easiest way to find me is simply to Google my name. I'm the only one there, so you don't have to go through a lot of pages to get to, you know. But that has all my podcasts, all my books, all my articles, everything that I've written and published is all available through the links there. So that's the easiest way to just Google Branch Isole and start from there.
Thank you so much. CWS audience, you heard him. Hey, get connected with him and see where your beliefs truly are. Are you where you say you want to be or where you think you are or what you are you where people are expecting you to be? Because it has to be your choice. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode and until next time, God bless.